But I'm not going to say anything about this movie because we have the preeminent experts on this filmmaker in this movie, and he's coming to the stage right now. Give him a big round of applause for everything, Richard Linklater.
Wow. We were joking a week ago, like, there'll be like 6 people here, it'll be like a little living room screening. So I'm just so thrilled that we have so many people here. It's just so exciting. And I have to admit, this 30-year anniversary thing, I'm not really that sentimental about anything, but pulling up tonight, just seeing Pickpocket on our marquee, I was flooded with all these memories. Like, I think Bresson, I'd seen L'Argent, which we showed last spring. So I'm not going to repeat my intro to Bresson 101 on that. I'm going to just talk personally about the Film Society and our relation with this filmmaker. I had seen L'Argent in '84, and then we started showing films the next year. I think my biggest desire in starting an organization like this, or just getting people together to watch a film, was secretly to see as many Bresson films as I could. And they just weren't showing anywhere. They did show that one because it was his most recent film, but I'm reading about the history of film, and there's Pickpocket and all these films. Like, how do you see them? Where do you? They weren't on video. So it was like, oh, you can rent a film, cost like $150 or whatever, and then maybe we can sucker 75 people into paying $2 each, and we can show these films. And that's where we started. We started showing the experimental shorts, but then in fall of '85 and spring of '86, we partnered with Charlie Nafis at ACC, and we did a series called The Spirit in the Flesh. And that's kind of inspired by a Paul Schrader book we had all read called Transcendental Style and Film, Bresson, Ozu, and Dreyer. So we showed some Carl Dreyer and Bresson films, but we showed Pickpocket, Mouchette, and I think Balthazar. We showed 3 Bressons there. And the great thing about having the films and projecting them, we got to watch them over and over. So I was just so excited to see Pickpocket. And then the next the next fall, in between that and the next fall, we became an organization. Decided to try to get grants, and we were doing really well. Everything we did, made its money back at least, and our definition of success. So the next fall, those 75 people paying $2. That next fall, we did a 7-film Bresson retrospective that fall, and that was probably the most excited I ever was for a series we've ever done. We've done a lot, but just to put so much into that, to hustle an audience for that, and it was just so special. We were showing them at Laguna Gloria in the classrooms out there, all 16mm prints, but it was just, so I was just, thinking of how that was, so inspiring, and to be back here again all those years later with a lot of people who weren't even born then, watching it, how far we've come. We're showing it in beautiful 35mm print. It's not like a 16mm in a classroom, but it is what this is. And you're in for such a great treat. This is really, I think, film historians, everyone, it's one of those top films of all time. But it doesn't really, like all Bresson's films, they don't feel, I don't know, to me, they never feel that self-important. They're too, they move so well. He has so much to say, crams so much in the movies. I love everything about his cinema. To me, he is cinema. He invented his own cinema that we get to experience. And this was, I think the way I want to see this film tonight, and I'll just share it with you, is I want to go back to 1959, pretend I was living in Paris, a young, existentialed out young French person, thinking the war had just ended, 14 years before. We found out about the camps in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Think of the world. Think of what was going on in literature and film and how it must have felt to be alive at that moment. And just the idea of existentialism, which, it had a great run there, before, I don't know what came next, linguistic-based structuralism, everything else. But, these were really important questions, and they're eternal questions. It didn't really ever die. This film is relevant, today as it was then, as it was in the 19th century, which, you know, when Dostoevsky wrote Crime and Punishment, which this is, you know, loosely based on. You'll see some of that here, but I think it's as much based on The Stranger, you know, which is what, early to mid 40s. You know, it was just so much of the time. And I think it's people, and it's the Bresson type of character, a loner, an outsider, an oddball, someone who's wondering, you know, what it's like, asking those big questions like, you know, what do I feel? You know, in that book, and Crime and Punishment, and this, they all coincidentally have like a mother who's died or is dying, and they're really asking themselves, you know, what am I feeling? Am I capable of feeling? You know, and who am I in relation to this world? And then the question, certainly Raskolnikov and Michel here are asking is like, well, if society's kind of corrupt, what is crime? What is society? You know, if you think coming off these two horrific wars, you know, what does civilization even mean? So what does it matter if I kill someone, you know, in a book, or in this case, just what if I rob people, you know? Am I one of those people who were above the law? You know, so he's asking that big Nietzschean, you know, question. Am I, you know, are some people above the law? So that's kind of his basis of character here. So I just think, and from that, you know, so much comes. Cinematically, you know, Taxi Driver wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this. You'll see a lot of other films and characters in here, but I just love that character so much. I think they never quite go away. And I won't talk too much about the style. How many are seeing a Bresson film for the first time? Not, yeah, some. Good. We'll talk a lot after about it. But I will say, his own personal style, this kind of, he doesn't show everything. He shows bits and pieces and makes you as a viewer put it all together. He's telling a story he wants you to feel. He wants you to ask some of these questions. And I think about feeling spiritual, you know, spirituality. Is there a God? You know, those are all here. I think the character in here says he believed in God for 3 minutes. But so yeah, he's asking those questions, and in that particular style, his elliptical, the way he edits, I want to say I think the greatest edited sequence in film history is in this movie, and you'll know it when you see it. When he's getting better as a pickpocket, he hooks up with these other guys, these other professionals, and they get on a train, and they kind of work their way through the train. It's just the sequence of shots, the way it moves and everything, it's just bliss. It's pure cinematic bliss that could not exist in any other art form. There it is. There's hardly a word spoken for those few minutes, and it's a symphony of close-ups, images, this film was done, it's a low-budget film. It's an absolute masterpiece, but it's a low-budget film done on the streets of Paris. It's a French New Wave film, as we talked about last week. It's like, you know, the crew of this film was bumping into the crew of Breathless as they were making it. It's a French New Wave film made by an almost 60-year-old man, but it's as youthful and as exuberant and asking the biggest questions, and in a brand new cinematic language. So imagine it's 59 and you're seeing cinema being reinvented, you know, right in front of your eyes. So here we are, Paris, 1959, the Cinematheque. We'll be around after, so enjoy the show. Some people see It's a Wonderful Life. This is our version of It's a Wonderful Life. And it is a wonderful life. This film proves it.
So I should mention before we talk about the film that, like, every time you see a 35mm print from now on, it's like seeing the Kinks live or something. It's like this incredible opportunity because, like,
yeah, I feel that way. Gosh,
it's really true.
It is true.
It's
more true every day.
And next generation will see, like, maybe if they're really lucky and they're really after it, they'll see 5 or 6 35mm movies a year if they're like really into it and they're in New York, you know. So we're really lucky to have this opportunity to see these on 35mm.
I know, it's so special. It's so special. I mean, yeah, it's a dying thing, and it's happening so fast. You know, they're just not making prints anymore. It's going to be even more rarefied. So, anyway,
what we do doesn't make economic sense at all.
No,
so we do it for this reason.
Yeah, all the more reason to be a member, to help us out every chance you get. Because, no, so special. And I was getting kind of choked up when you're talking about the full year we had in film here. It's amazing. Yeah, it's just so cool. So I want to thank Lars and everybody at the Film Society who worked so damn hard. And everybody. We're in some kind of Laura. I don't know. I just think we're at our best ever. Where we're at right now. It's an organization. And I don't know, everything.
Our beautiful members.
Most especially.
So that movie, wow.
Yeah.
Like watching that after hearing your introduction to L'Argent, where you talked about Bresson's style of directing his actors, where he was just like, take it down. I don't want any acting.
Yeah, well, they're non-actors to begin with. And then he has them really not doing much at all. I was struck so much by this, how much just everyone's looking at the ground. That's the classic Bresson character. Take a few steps.
And I'm also struck from watching this, when we talked about Sam Fuller's Pickup on South Street, which has like the ultimate kind of erotic pickpocket scene in that movie.
Whitmark at the beginning.
Yeah. Which like thinking of this as like the sort of erotic nature of pickpocketing.
Yeah.
And the sort of furtive kind of like secretive nature of the cruising.
Yeah, it's almost like George Morris, our dear mentor who passed away in 1989. He could explain very clearly how this was like it was a very gay movie, the way the other pickpockets, the way he picks them up. But instead of actual sex, it's the visceral experience of, stealing, of pickpocketing. And then the thing in the train station, the train said that's like, I don't know, some big group sex thing. I'm just making this up. But George was funny that way. But like that's a replacement. That's obviously kind of what makes him feel alive. To have that. So I think that's one of those big questions. And let's admit it's a lot less harmful, I guess, than killing someone, which is the other thing. Even in Woody Allen's most recent movie, Irrational Man, he's kind of playing on the same thing. Like, what if I kill someone? More silly, but I don't know. I think if you feel you have to test yourself if you are some Superman, keep it to small crime. And he does. He ends up exactly where he predicts at the beginning when the detective, who I love so much, he's like his priest, and he's such a good foil. But he said, well, how would they go on forever? He says, no, they would stop. If once they find out they're not, and that's kind of where he is. He almost intentionally gets caught. He's in a prison cell that's not much different than the room he lives in. It doesn't seem to make any difference to him. I think he's realizing he is just a normal guy. So, hey, time to get married and live the rest of your life like a 4-inch love like everybody else. So.
It's so fascinating that this was filmed at the same time as Breathless.
And a bunch of other new ways,
At exactly the same time.
Yeah.
Like they were crossing each other up. And to think about the very different kind of, both like intense, slender, young male heroes of those two movies.
Who were kind of beyond the law in their own minds,
Yeah.
Again, it was the water, it was the air of France at the time, I think. Maybe worldwide. But I wonder if they compared notes. Like, what's your film about, Jean-Luc?
So what did Godard think of like Bresson? Like you said that the younger wave.
Yeah, they really loved him, and Godard really loved. One of his favorite films ever is Balthazar, which comes about 6 years later. He did big interviews with him. You can find interviews with Godard, So I think he was a big fan. They all were. He was the one they really respected. Melville, of course, but I think Bresson they put him in some special category. So, Yeah, what a, and to think he would outlive, you know, Truffaut and some of the others, you know, it's amazing. Blessed with such a long life, you know. I think it took him all those years in between movies just to kind of feel a story, you know. He only, of these 13 films, only 2 were kind of original stories that, I think Balthazar, which is about a donkey, it follows a donkey through, you know, its life. And says a lot about the world, you know, the corruption of the world through it. And his second to last film, The Diablo Probablement, that was kind of an original. The other ones, they're always based on literary, you know, have strong literary bases.
Suggested by.
Yeah, but there's not much left of them in the work, just kind of an inspiration. You know, I think even some of the greatest directors ever, that doesn't mean, you know, if you're a filmmaker inventing your own language, I'm thinking about like Kubrick and others, that doesn't mean you necessarily create, you have that part of your brain where you can create the characters that other writers can come up with. So I think they need that as a jumping off place to tell what they want to say cinematically.
So would Bresson work from a rigid scenario where he would break down the script, or would he be one of these auteurs who kind of allows it to flow?
Both. If you read his book, the great book on cinema, one of the top few is Notes on Cinematography, and he really talks about that. But he talks a lot about spontaneity and being open for that, you know, inspiration and finding. But I think he would prep pretty extensively. And you know, I saw a really fascinating film once. It's a documentary called. Has anybody ever seen it? It's called Bresson's Models, or The Models of Bresson. It's by who's that? Babette Mangold. She's a director of photography. When was that around? 10, 15 years ago? She goes around and she actually finds people who work with Bresson. She's obsessed with, I think, this film and some others. And she tracks down the Jacques, the student, his best friend. And it's fun to kind of run into him in middle age. And he talks about working with Bresson. It was just fascinating to hear them talk about how he worked and what they thought he was doing or not doing. You know, he was kind of, well, first no one really understood him or what he was doing. You know, even on the set, he was kind of this, they referred to him as just kind of grumpy old guy that they had no idea that he was a graduate student, I think, and now he's had a career as a doctor or something, but he said it just never crossed his mind what he was working on with this whole guy. It would be a film that people would be coming up to him the rest of his life and wanting to talk to him about.
It's significant that that film is called Bresson's Models, because that's how he thought of his
models. Yeah,
that's how he thought of his people as models, not actors.
Yeah, they're just human representatives, I guess. And yeah, he really wanted us to fill in all the blanks of their kind of neutral performance. He really hated the artifice of like acting, you know, like that's not what cinema is really about at its purest form. You know,
so you've made a lot of movies yourself, I think, right? I heard. When you direct actors, do you ever do that?
No. Just different, different approach.
Yeah.
Different theory of cinema, I guess. Different. You know, you flirt with it. That's what's so exciting about even getting started in film. And you have all this in your head, but you have everything else too. I mean, it's just your own personality or how you see yourself. You know, Bresson was a painter. I think he started from it visually in a certain way, and I think the way he saw cinema it was coming from visual arts, not so much the history of, you know, dramatic theater or that kind of storytelling. So I think he's just coming from a different, his own place. That's what makes him so unique. And he was probably I think people like him so much because he seems like the purest of filmmakers. He had his style, what he wanted to express, he did it. He just never compromised at all. Seems incapable of that, and just made his films. So he's kind of a hero, I think, to all filmmakers, you know, forever. He never really did anything, but he seemed like so stubborn probably in his own rigid ideas. If you read his book, it's fascinating, but there's a certain rigidity to his methods and his theories that seem, they'd be kind of ludicrous, if you tried to copy them or really take on all that. I think it's all fun to think about, but I don't know where it applies really, so much of it. But I mean, there's so many great ideas, and it filters in, but through your own artistic personality, perhaps, or there's something inspiring for sure. But just like any music or any art form, you can't really imitate. It's impossible. And when people try, it's kind of ridiculous. I've seen filmmakers who try to get performances like that, and it just seems like, what are you doing? It's like, based on like the theory or something they liked about Bresson. Doesn't really work.
It's a tricky act.
Yeah, don't imitate. Be inspired by everybody, but don't.
What if we have any
Yeah, well, let's talk
questions
about
or
the movie.
Right over here.
So how did he, as a painter, how did he, I'm kind of a leading figure in this movement, this unlikely movement of his time, how did he come to filmmaking? What brought him to filmmaking? How did he choose his models?
So the question was, how did Bresson come to filmmaking, and how did he choose his models and choose his art?
I think he came to it very slowly. I mean, he was born in the early 20th century, and he started making his first films like in the early 40s, late 30s, early 40s. He started experimenting with the form. So he's had a couple decades as a visual artist before he puts his toe into cinema. But I mean, what an exciting time that would have. How could you ignore cinema in the era he was brought up in? This new art form, he saw it go from silent film, talkies, color, what he was experiencing or seeing the possibilities of. How could that not get him thinking? And probably at some point, and I'm just assuming, I've read interviews with him and stuff, but I don't remember him speaking autobiographically about the moment he discovered cinema or anything. He just started, I know, he made a short film that was discovered in the 80s. I think he did like 34, so he's about in the 30s. But it was like he had made kind of a surrealist short, just as an experiment. He didn't really claim it or anything. But when it was lost, or considered lost, or he didn't take it that serious, but it was discovered somewhere in the 80s, so it had been kind of lost for 50 years. And then it came around, someone found it, and I think he saw it again and said he had a lot of interest in it just because it was, a part of him from a much earlier time. But he didn't like it. It was imitative, and it was that film that he was kind of, I think he hadn't developed his own ideas yet. And you often, when you see what people would consider his first film is like from 45, I guess, La Dame du Bois de Boulogne. And that's still a ways from this. It's an early film. It's not one of my favorites. A lot of people love that film. But I kind of think he kicks off shortly after that with Diary Country Priest, Man Escaped, and this. His 50s are where he starts to mature. But even then, by the end, I think L'Argent, his last film, is, I have to say, technically, to me, it's still his best. Because it's total distillation of everything. Like here, he uses a score for those transition moments. Like he dropped off everything. By the end, it's just something even more pure. I don't know. I think he went out on such a strong, pure note on L'Argent. But you see him evolve. You see his own. He takes on color at some point in the late 60s. And all the rest of his films are in color. So he's changing with the times. He's adapting. He's not evolving. So he's not that stuck. But his storytelling, you can see his interests don't change that much. What he has to say about the modern world.
I saw firsthand right back here.
Thanks for hosting a great event to you and Austin Film Society. Like you had said, the movie is able to kind of cram in a lot of storyline and content. And I guess the question would be, what for you makes this movie so relevant today? For me, it's for the fact that Bresson wasn't afraid to force the audience to make their own decisions and force them to actually pay attention to every kind of scene. and allows the scenes to transition with that sex appeal of stealing, you know, kind of as the sex scenes. For me, it was the fact that he forced him to pay attention and use that sex to engage him again and again. So what would be your opinion, or why do you think it's still relevant today in, you know, the cinematography?
Well, thanks for that. You just kind of said so much there.
Yeah, I'm known for that.
No, good. Thank you. That's what we're here for. But I was thinking, it just hit me as you were talking. It's like, well, he uses the kind of the eroticism of the thefts, and we as cinema viewers experience that the same way Michelle is experiencing it. Like, why are we here? Oh, we're here to see a bunch of, you know, great pickpockets. You know, that's kind of how you might describe the film on a superficial level. Like, huh, man, you know. So, and the same thing with him. Oh, I feel alive when I'm doing this. That's like a certain level. But yeah, I just like the way I feel when I watch his movies. I'm kind of exhilarated and always just thinking, you know, different. He does force you to look at things and kind of examine how you feel about stuff. And the good thing about seeing this film, you know, 30 years later, you can kind of examine how you felt then and now. It's a fun film to grow with, you know, like all great art. You know, well, in my 20s I felt this way. Oh, now I feel this, you know, whatever. So it's a fun one to return to.
Well, how were your perceptions different than they were since you last saw this film?
I haven't actually seen it in a while. I don't think I've seen this in quite a while. I saw it so much, you know, at a different time. It seems more youthful. I guess that's natural. When you go, I'm now older than the detective. Probably. But again, a superficial reading.
It does seem more youthful than a 60-year-old would make. It seems like it's a very
all
youthful,
his films are.
Yeah.
That's what's incredible.
And even like L'Argent feels like a really youthful film.
Yeah, every film he ever made felt like a genius's first or second film. You know, I mean that in the best way. Like someone was pouring everything they had into this one movie that was introducing, you know, something new. Like every damn film feels that way. He never repeated himself in a certain way. There's never a rut he felt he was in. You know, like any artist who has a long career, you kind of feel, oh, okay, I've kind of seen this before. And, you know, it's the same old stuff. I mean, he kind of twirls around certain things, but he's really a great storyteller. I think he's into whatever story, and they're all very different, actually.
There's probably like no market pressure or no like producer like, come on, hurry up, where's your next movie?
Yeah, I don't think so. He caught a wave in the 60s, though, where I can't imagine, but he was, I think because the French New Wave had taken off, and those guys liked him so much, so if you were going to be cool and a French producer, he actually did get quite a few. His most prolific period was the 60s. I guess he was in his 60s, but he was, you know, he did Mouchette and Balthazar like within 1 year of each other, some of the same actors, so he was kind of moving along there. And into the 70s, he really, it sort of started slowing down later 70s, but I mean, he was old, and to the day he died, I think he still had projects he was trying to get made.
I saw another hand back here. I wonder if that question is still in play.
But he was frustrated by the business. I remember reading in some interviews with him, and films would fall apart, just like anybody, you know, as great, as acclaimed as he was, it's still the same crap, you know. You need to raise money, they don't think your film's commercial enough, you know, whatever that is. But I think France is a slightly better place to do that than certain places.
Probably so. Mike?
Yeah, you sort of answered this already, I guess, in between me wanting to ask it. But if you look at a movie like Mouchette, which was just 8 years later, there's so less of explaining, there's so less of stating the theme and the dialogue. In fact, there's just a lot less dialogue in the movie. And the reason I got turned on to him was from the Tarkovsky book, Sculpting in Time, where he really worships Bresson. And I was wondering if you could talk about this idea that both of them had, that the art of cinema is art, and somehow in the process been hijacked by just theater. That what people wanted to see was plays on the screen, and that has sort of become a popular notion of cinema and the commercial notion of cinema. And these guys were really trying to get down into what is cinema as an art and how can we sort of define that.
Yeah, Tarkovsky speaks so much of that in his book, and so does Bresson. It's like, we're not theater, we're not music, we're not painting, it's cinema. What is cinema, as opposed to, cinema is always spoken of as an amalgam of all the art forms. Well, that sounds good, I guess, but what does that really mean, So what is unique about film? And I think he was searching for that, or had his own strong ideas about that, as did Tarkovsky, for sure. His book is beautiful, Sculpting in Time. Just about art, but also cinema, poetry, everything. This phase he's in, you're right, Mouchette, Balthazar, they start becoming much more quiet. I think a lot of it is in his films in the 50s here. He used voiceover. I think he uses it in a really interesting way. He's like, Michel seems to be a writer of some kind. He's like, again, Travis Bickle. He's keeping a journal. He's revealing himself, but he's also, is he lying to himself there too? It's almost funny when he disappears to, I like that transition. He's in Italy for 2 years, and it takes about, 28 seconds of screen time. But he talks about coming back. He made all this money. He blew it on gambling and women. I kind of think he didn't. Like, I don't know if that guy, but it sounds good on the page, So let's not forget there's kind of an inventive, imaginative element is, as much as you are taught to think what he's saying is accurate, I think it calls into question. And even the narration is so interesting because it has that contradictory. The narrator will say something, and then he himself will say the opposite, or disagree with what the narrator himself just said. I kind of like that, like it adds another dimension to, you're seeing something very different than necessarily what you're hearing. So.
It's active viewing.
Yeah, but it's kind of pushing and pulling you a little bit there in a really cool way. So. But yeah, he dropped that off. He dropped things like score, or narration. Those go away in all his movies. That's what I meant. His whole career was kind of a paring down. Some people get more elaborate, bigger. He's going the other way.
Right over here.
One of the things I noticed about this is the sound design, especially in like the scene where we're kind of out in the street and you would expect to hear a whole lot of ambient noise, like cars honking and things, and there is some of that. But the thing that really stands out, like almost like I assume maybe it was posting, like footsteps. There's just like constant like footsteps on the soundtrack. It's very high on the soundtrack, it seems like. And I'm reminded there's something, I don't know if it was notes on cinematography or an interview or something, where he talked about how he liked to kind of focus on sound because he thought sound was in some ways more suggestive than visuals. I'm kind of wondering, like, when you hear that, what does that suggest to you? Like,
he speaks quite a bit of that. I think it's just the way we perceive things visually and orally. He talks about that a lot. That image meets sound to create something else. So if you really see how you're being, I don't know if way manipulated, and part of it's maybe practical. That first trip to the racetrack, I assure you, there's no, just on a practical filmmaking level, you're hearing an announcer. You're maybe hearing hoofbeats. Talk about feet moving, here come the horses around the ground. You notice how you never see them? That would require a bigger budget, probably. It's just a crowd of people, and then you go in and you hear everything. So you're creating it all in your head. If you really break it down, it's a crowd of people, he sneaks in, and then the reverse shots. And they all move their heads like they're following a horse. It works. It's very effective cinematically, storytelling-wise, but there's less there than you imagine, which is kind of remarkable.
It's always amazing to talk to an Austin audience, an AFS audience. It gets just like this level of questions and this level of understanding and interest. It's really amazing. Every time we have a filmmaker, they always say, "You guys Austin really has the
Yeah.
best audiences, and that is
Well,
really true. Like this kind of community.
That's why we exist.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be here if there wasn't, you know. That's
It's kind of self-sustaining. It's kind of like a self-watering plant in a way.
Yeah.
Right back here.
So I hate to follow up with kind of a dumb question, but
No, please.
We could use one.
I know that he was a big influence on Paul Schrader, and I know that movie in particular, you know, had a lot of effect or a lot of influence for other filmmakers. But I wanted to know if this character had been depicted before, where it was like a loner who was kind of like just by himself and just so focused on his, kind of like so passionate about this one thing, about just kind of mastering, you know, doing one thing well, but being so detached from everybody else in society.
I don't know. Let's do a quick search through the audience. What films before 1959 can you think of that had such a loner? You know, because most films, the notion of a personal film is really just coming into being here, that you could make a film about some weird little idea. You know, most films in all countries were pretty. You know, it was storytelling. You couldn't make kind of outside of the experimental, what would be considered experimental film, but like a narrative feature that people would show up at a commercial venue and see. Let's just say we're in that realm. I don't know. I'm thinking. What
Yeah.
M. Good. I mean, he's within a.
That's
He's
about
not.
the community, not the loner.
Yeah. Is it? Do you spend that much time with?
Unless
You're
you're still
alone. He's around. I like the way the other pickpocket sort of looks like Peter Lorre's. Speaking of him, that guy is actually a real pickpocket. I think his name. He only had in the credits. His name is Kagasi or something. He had one name. He didn't have a last name, but he was like the real deal. I think he was the technical advisor.
That's so cool.
Technical advisor, but he got a part in the movie, and he had that great. He has a great look to him.
How did he get paid?
I don't know. I don't think they had to pay him.
Yeah, he just paid himself. It does make you want to go pick pockets a little bit. I mean, to me, a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. It's kind of that kind of one-on-one. Yeah. The anonymity of it to strangers, so yeah, okay, M. But is he the total focus of the? I mean, you care for him. That's Fritz Lang's kind of genius about him. But I don't.
Private eye movies.
It
like,
doesn't. Yeah, there's a lot of loner, kind of anti-hero type guys. But I don't know. I think he was kind of a new version of that. Like I said, it had certainly been around in literature for quite a while. But
maybe Ethan from The Searchers?
Boy, he sure is caught up in a big story. Yeah, he's an obsessive character, certainly, and that's only 1 year before this. But yeah, I mean the history's full of like obsessive, people who are. But I don't know if it's all about. That story would be him after the Civil War, like what he's doing. You'd be alone with him on horseback for, I don't know what that would be. But he's so engaged with those around him, so I would almost put him not in that category. I mean, this guy's mother is dying, and he's not visiting her, and he robbed her. But not usually the subject of a movie,
So I think we'll wrap it up. Maybe we'll take another contribution or two. But I did want to thank our friends at UT Press. We've given away all their books, but they were terrific. And if you're looking for that last-minute Christmas gift for the film lover in your life, they've got some great books, including from Charles Ramirez Berg's book about the classical Mexican cinema and others. So check it out. Who's got an incredible contribution that's really going to power this thing to its final conclusion? I see the first hand I saw was right over here.
Could you speak a little bit more to what makes this a French New Wave film, aside from it being in France during that time? Like, what elements of the movie?
I don't know. What are the what boxes do you need to check to be a French New Wave film? Personal film, kind of outside the system, low budget.
Location shooting.
Yeah, all kind of practical locations. Very much one person's vision. It's not a thing. So I don't, So I think it certainly has the spirit of it. What kind of was a disqualifier, like I implied, is I think Bresson's like 58 years old at this point. But it, that shouldn't be a thing, whether you're 26 or 58. I think you could participate in something new, because I think as much as they're sort of reinventing cinema, he's kind of, through his own cinema, reinventing his own kind. He's perpetually. So again, he wasn't the one they were excluding. I think they'd be proud to have him. So yeah, it just feels that way. It's a different way to see it, because you see it as kind of classic French film because he was older, but I see it on that level, kind of a street level film. It was certainly made that way. So it was, just had a slightly different agenda, I guess.
Let's get our last contribution of the night from let's see, let's get our last contribution of the night. If a woman wanted to ask a question, that'd be great. I feel like we got a bunch of dudes. Can somebody see better than me? Yeah. Okay, yeah, ask a question. Yeah, great.
So it seems to me that Bresson really addressed some themes that are timely right now, and about the intimacy of violence, to be able to violate your own mother's trust, and it felt like that he wrestled with these issues of conscience throughout the film. People challenging him and the way he evaded his own admission, and it seems like I'm sure there's a question in here somewhere. I have seen some films that raise these kinds of esoteric or psychological or spiritual even themes, but he did it in such a way that he was just incredibly thought-provoking, right? As a director, wouldn't you agree that he wasn't preachy about it? He was very...
No, it's all on us. I think that's what's kind of the brilliance of his cinema. It's throwing it on you. What does that mean? One of my favorite lines, when Jean asks him, like, don't you love her? He goes, yep, I love her more than myself. But for him, that's not saying much. So, he's really battling that. Yeah, what does it mean? He's really searching. Yeah, what is Jean? Well, he finds her in the end. What a strange path it took to find her. He's behind bars, but I don't think he'll be behind bars long. What is she? What is she? The neighbor of his mom. She's a mom. What is she?
She's the one who penetrates his desire for one-way transactions.
Yeah. She represents, like, I think in Bresson's, like, what is it? Jansenism? Jansenism? Jansen? Kind of a part of Catholicism. I don't know much about it, but it's spoken about in relation to Bresson, how they really believed in this kind of sudden grace. That you would have this kind of epiphany of grace that would be transformational. So I think she is that for him. At the very end, where he just goes, the way the light hit her face, he's the way the light hits her face is the thing. Yeah, like.
Well, she forgave him after she thought he was so disgusting.
Yeah, so.
He was all she had.
Yeah.
She doesn't, yeah.
I think it's more the acknowledgement of suffering, because this whole film seems very existential and very much about with songs. I don't know exactly how to explain that, but it's about, I think it's about the making explicit that life is suffering. I don't think that he's gonna, I think it's that she is no longer afraid to sort of, think about it, he's choosing something that's very dangerous and that's very frightening.
subject to it. It's the existential dilemma.
Yeah, well, that's one of the bigger questions, I guess.
So the sequel is that they both make a great team.
Well, she's pretty strong. The fact that she is a single mom, then who kind of turns down the father. She doesn't love him enough to be with him. What does that say? It's pretty, 59, that's kind of, it's a big choice, probably.
People don't talk much about Pickpocket 2, but that's pretty much the plot of it, I think.
Another thing, pickpocket, let's not forget, talk about alienation. It's not a French term. So the title of this movie, it's an English language term, which is probably pretty rare in France, if you think about it. I've always struck by that. I have a big pickpocket poster. And you just look at it and go, that's a French film. But the poster looks pretty English. I don't know. So more and more, I guess there's no better term for it. Like, okay, the English language did it right on that one. We'll stick with that one.
Something about stealing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where the English got it right. So we don't have a movie next week.
Oh man.
We don't have anything next week. Our lives are on this brutal hold because there's nothing to do.
There's a lot of good movies out in the world, though.
Okay, so what should people go and do next week or in the weeks to come? What movie should they watch?
Oh, which one?
Carol.
Carol, certainly.
Yeah.
No.
Have you seen it yet?
A lot of good movies. I have seen Carol.
How'd you like it?
It's great.
Yeah. Okay, go see Carol.
Go see Todd Haynes. A masterpiece.
Trailer before Big Short.
It's wonderful. Another good year for cinema. A lot of great films. A lot of them are out there.
How was that Anomalisa?
Oh, it's great. I saw it. Anomalisa is incredible.
Yeah, that opens in January here.
Oh.
Charlie Kaufman's new film.
45 years.
A little unnerving. 45 years. The Charlotte Rampling.
The trailer for Everybody Wants Some came out today, too.
Oh, yeah. See you in April on that one. Yeah.
April market. April. Maybe we'll do something. Maybe we'll do something around that. AFS.
Yeah.
We'll see. Maybe.
Spotlight's a good movie. There's so many good movies. It's a great time for cinema. Always is.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for supporting everything. Thank you. Have a good holiday. See you next year.